Reports from advisory committees. Number 1, letter promoting accessibility in downtown Oshawa. Councillor Hurst, looking to you.
Thank you. Sorry, there was a typo on my notes. I apologize. Yes, so I'm prepared to make a motion to approve this. However, I'd like to make a couple of minor changes to it, please, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so the recommendation is on the floor, but you are moving your own motion, so you can go ahead and do that.
Okay.
If there's any changes to the recommendation.
Any changes? Thank you. The Council approve a letter in principle to be sent by the Oshawa Accessibility Advisory Committee to downtown businesses this fall, promoting accessibility in a form and content satisfactory to the Commissioner of Development Services and the City Manager.
Okay, would you care to speak to that, Councillor Hurst?
The purpose of that is just to make sure, as I said, the form and content. The form and content is approved by the City Manager and the Commissioner of Development Services. I think this is a terrific initiative, and I just want to make sure that the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted accordingly. Thank you.
So for clarity, you were just adding to the recommendation in the form and content of in satisfactory to the City Manager and of Development Services. Councillor Nicholson. Your microphone, sir. Excuse me.
I'd like to move a sub-amendment.
Okay.
And that is delete the words "and content." My reason for that is I have no problem with staff checking the form and all that stuff, but I don't believe it's the role of staff for the City of Oshawa to decide what is going into the content of a letter from an advisory committee to the public. I think the content should be done by the writer, whoever's speaking. The staff should just make sure that everything is straightforward and not breaking any laws or confidentiality, things like that. It's a precedent to give staff the right to review content from advisories, and I just don't think that's the right way to go.
Sure. Turning to the chair, do you need that in writing, or can you make that? Members of the committee on the amendment.
Can I ask a little bit more about what the advisory committee's intended content is?
Madam Commissioner, I wonder if you could fill a committee in on that information.
Through the chair, actually, I would ask Julie McIsaac to come and answer that question because she attends those meetings and would have more information regarding the purpose of the letter and the content.
Excellent. Good morning, Ms. McIsaac.
Good morning.
I see you're wearing your orange to recognize the Indigenous.
I am.
Nice to see you. Good morning.
Through you, Councillor Marks, to Councillor Giberson, the Accessibility Advisory Committee have been speaking about the lack of accessibility in some businesses in the downtown, and recognizing that currently the mandate does not really speak to the fact of advising the downtown businesses. This would be a council directive in order to do this. So I think the Accessibility Advisory Committee has been thinking about just advising the businesses about what they could do around accessibility. We have been speaking with economic development and have some proposals around doing a bit of a information session in hand with economic development around improvement grants available to businesses, as well as the Accessibility Committee letting the businesses know from first-hand experience what it's like to be somebody with a disability trying to access their facilities.
Councillor Giberson.
Thank you. That helps quite a bit. So when you Ms. McIsaac, when you refer to grants, does that include, or does it only include the facade improvement grant that I think a lot of businesses and owners are unaware can be applied for accessibility improvements? Last that I understood, anyway.
Yeah, through you, Chair Marks, I can't speak to all of the grants because that is under economic development's purview, but one of the things we have talked about is the facade improvements. But there are other opportunities to be able to educate businesses around other things that they can do to accommodate people with disabilities.
Okay. Okay, maybe it would just be best for now to wait to see the form and content that comes back from the advisory committee before going into detail on this today. I'm interested to see what they're going to come back with. Is the letter or initiative going to pass back through this committee, or it doesn't come back here?
Commissioner Adams.
Through the chair to Councillor Giberson, it would not come back.
Okay. I guess, Mr. Chair, my interest in this item today is just to ensure that the advisory committee, with their intent of this this recommendation, is that they're able to make the most of it. So I guess I would be interested from the committee's point of view in, I'm sure that there are a whole bunch of different alternate arrangements of what this information initiative could take, and I just want to make sure that as far as this committee and council is willing to take it, that we would be in a position, if necessary, to help better empower the Accessibility Advisory Committee to do this work. I saw on...
So let me just stop you there, Councillor,
Yeah,
because
sure.
we're dealing with the sub-amendment of Councillor Nicholson to remove content from the main motion.
Okay.
Then when we get back to the main motion, I'll recognize you again and you continue that chain of thought, because I think that's what you're doing. But procedurally, we should be dealing with Councillor
With just
Nicholson's
the,
sub-amendment.
amendment, sure.
That's right.
Okay.
Anybody on the sub-amendment? Councillor Kerr. Good morning.
Yes, thank you and good morning, Chair Marks. Pleasure to be here. I'm going to speak against the amendment. I can't vote at this committee, but I would do so at council should it come that far. The reason why we put that in terms of content, and it's acceptable to both the city manager and the solicitor, is that we don't just put forward any wording that hasn't been vetted or approved, and therefore we need to have that a surety that whatever goes out there is not going to contravene any bylaw or any legalese that the city needs to be taken care of. So I would say that we should not remove "and content." We should just leave it the way it's been worded by Councillor Hurst. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Looking back to the committee, Councillor Nicholson.
Well, I appreciate the concern. The issue is I think form takes care of that. When staff review the form of the notice, make sure that it's done appropriately, that it doesn't cause any legal issues. That's to the form of the content. Content is what's the message of the letter. And if the signatory of the letter is the advisory committee, then they should choose what goes in the letter, subject to the review to make sure that it doesn't put us in any jeopardy. But the message we send is that an advisory committee may wish to send a certain message. If they have to get approvals of staff for their message, then they're really not an advisory committee anymore. They're basically advising staff when they're supposed to be advising us. So, I mean, I think it's a minor point, but I think it's the principle that you want to encourage the advisory committees to take ownership of their letters, ownership of their communications, and if they're subject to review, you may act as a deterrent to them stepping up and trying to advocate for the issues that they believe are important.
Thank you very much. Any other members of the committee to the amendment? Councillor Hurst.
Thank you. I believe this would be a collaborative approach, and as Councillor Kerr indicated, the content. So we want everybody on the same page, and I appreciate the work of the Accessibility Advisory Committee, and so I know what their intent would be, but I want to make sure whatever message is sent out there is in compliance of what the city is able and willing to do, and maybe, some links to possible further information. But I believe at the end of the day, this would be a collaborative approach, and so we don't want the wrong message, hence the wrong content going out to the downtown business owners. So it's all in the prep work, and it's a proactive and collaborative motion at the end of the day, Mr. Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you. I saw Councillor Guyberson's hand up. Thank you.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. So if we get into the legislative mandate of the Accessibility Advisory Committee, and one of the characters of the Accessibility Advisory Committees in particular under provincial legislation, and this speaks a little bit to Councillor Nicholson's point earlier, one of their roles that's defined in legislation is that they advise a council. In my time on the advisory committee, we often got involved in discussions of this nature, and the role of the Accessibility Advisory Committee is to advise a city's council. The work that staff does is absolutely critical to the work that the advisory committees do, but at the end of the day, the flow through of their responsibility is directly to the council. I'm not going to get too hung up on semantics with this particular item at this point. I'm going to leave it at that. I'll vote in favor of the amendment because I do understand the intent and spirit that Councillor Nicholson is putting forward. You know, and I think that staff do understand the role, and most of the advisory committee members understand their relationship on something like this. I would just, wherever this particular recommendation lands, my hope is just that that everyone would understand what the responsibilities are in something like this, because it is their legislated role to advise the council, not a city staff, and not necessarily to be managed by a city staff in terms of message content. However, I do know, as has been expressed, that the role of city staff is very important here in terms of making sure that the messaging is on point with legal and what programs do and don't actually do in terms of grants and so forth. So wherever the amendment lands, I think that the intent needs to just be understood on this.
Thank you very much, Ms. McKenzie. I wonder if you could stay just because we're going to circle back to the main motion and there may be some questions then. Members of the committee on the amendment. Visiting councillors? Seeing none. All those in favor of the amendment? Opposed? That's carried. Moving now to the main motion. I wonder if the clerk could read it out as amended. Thank you.
The council approve a letter in principle to be sent by the Oshawa Accessibility Advisory Committee to downtown businesses this fall, promoting accessibility in a form satisfactory to the Commissioner of Development Services and City Manager.
Members of the committee, Councillor Nicholson.
Information items. Downtown businesses, do we have a definition of the area that we're classifying as downtown businesses?
Looking to Commissioner Adams or Ms.
Is it
McKenzie.
CBA? Is it Board of Management?
Thank you for staying, Ms. McKenzie, by the way.
Through you, Chair Marks. The specifics has not been determined, but the conversation at the Accessibility Advisory Committee is around the BIA. The
BIA, okay. That leads to me, the second question is advising the downtown businesses of opportunities, grants, and communications in the city seems to be the role of BIA. I think that's why we collect a lot of money for them and give them a lot of money. They seem to be chasing other tails, but they don't seem to be communicating with their members. Why would they not be collaborating with the Accessibility Committee to advocate to their members, make their businesses, especially their entrances, accessible to all? I see this as a very much a collaborative role between the accessibility and the BIA. Why would they not be involved? Why are we going around them?
Commissioner Adams?
Through the chair, my understanding is we wouldn't be going around them, that they would be part of the collaboration.
Are they going to pay for half the cost then?
The cost of what?
Well, mailing. You've got to mail, or so hand delivering, or we've got staff out there. Like, how are we getting this out there?
Through you, Chair Marks, the conversation at the Accessibility Advisory Committee has not gone into details of how and who and what. However, there has been a lot of conversation about collaboration, both with city staff and with the BIA.
Just the reason I ask is that was the one thing that was missing was that, if we're mailing it out to 450 businesses, there is a cost. I know that the advisory committee doesn't have a budget for it. So what's missing, I think, from the motion is who's paying for it. Is it coming out of the staff budget? Is it coming out of BIA? Is it being shared? Because someone is going to have to pay Canada Post to deliver it or have somebody hand deliver it. So just wondering if staff could address that. Maybe in a subsequent meeting. I'm not asking them to do it today.
Duly noted. Okay. Ms. McIsaac, I wonder if you had an answer
Yeah,
for
through you, Chair Marks. As I said, we haven't had those specific discussions. However, there is some budget in the Accessibility Advisory Committee for promotion that could be used for this.
For mailings as well?
Correct.
Okay, then that solves that problem. Thank you.
Members of the committee on the main motion? Seeing none. Visiting councillors? Looking back to the committee, all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you very much. Moving on to the public consent agenda. I look first to the members of the committee for any items to pull. Councillor Neal.
Corp 1979, please.